I'm back from my break and I finished migrating all of the player systems to be multiplayer now. So, loading the game, you can see in the top corner we have a quest here, and that's because all of the data is written to the database. I'll just show you some of the obvious places where it's clear that we're now actually writing the data to the database. If we look in things like the currencies, you can see we have some teleport shrooms here. And if we go to the shop as well, we can buy things from the stock. This happens to be 0 coins, but obviously it won't in the end. I've done a lot of refactoring to make a lot of the things work. But yeah, we can get a quest. We can see it's added to the tracker. We can remove it from the tracker and add it back. And we can move this quest tracker around as well and then minimize it. And then this setting should persist when we reload the game. A lot of small things like that have been set into play. There are still some bugs, but I think it's going to be an iterative experience where you try to implement as much new functionality as you can and you just build on that as you go. I knew this going into it, but building out all of these systems over these past 2 weeks was so repetitive, not really motivating, but we've got that out of the way. And I think we're in a good place now where we can say this is a multiplayer game. And while things are pulled from the database right now, there are still some scenarios where systems may not be as resilient to cheating as I would like them to be. My focus for this time around was just to make sure that the data is synchronized between the server and the player effortlessly. So as I've talked about before, the player has its own copy of data that it gets from the server, and the server also has a copy of the data that uses as the authoritative copy of what that player has in their inventory, their stats, and so on. And whenever the player interacts with the game, it sends requests to the server to make changes accordingly. And the server will validate that request according to what its own copy says. I think this becomes clear if we look at a particular example. So let's say you have a player that is collecting loot like monster drops. The player has a copy of that loot locally, and when it clicks on it or runs into it, then it is deposited into their inventory. And then from there, the player tells the server, hey, there's something new in the inventory, please update this. Or you could have a more resilient scenario where the player runs into that loot, and when the player collides with that loot to pick it up, the server can deposit it into the player's inventory and then update the player's inventory. So rather than the player being the authority on what loot they picked up, the server knows and then lets the player know instead. This latter approach will obviously be way more cheat proof. So I have about 15 player systems or so, and of those, I would say only a few of them are resilient enough. In all cases, you do have the server having the authoritative copy, but it is possible to cheat in a game by modifying your computer's local memory for that application. I personally never even thought of that or done that, but I did find that out in my research, and I do want to make sure that the game can't be exploited in that way. Beyond updating all of these systems to be able to actually write data, I have also added the ability to teleport between maps. So as we just switched to this monster map, the player changed servers. I have 2 different instances of the game running on my computer, one for each map, and we're now on the slime map. In Godot, in order to spawn anything in the map, you have a multiplayer synchronizer. So the multiplayer synchronizer spawns the player, and it also spawns these monsters as well. So I just started working on this. I have a few slimes here. You can actually attack them. I need to do some more work to make sure that we can spawn monsters. I want to take my time and do this more rigorously because I want to have a party system. And depending on whether you're in a party, you'll have different bonuses and loot distribution methods. So rather than just implementing monster spawns for single player and then having to do a huge refactor to accommodate parties, I'd rather start by designing the complex and simpler situations and make sure that the solution works for both. One of the things that I've learned with this huge multiplayer refactor is that while there are some benefits to just building things out and getting some progress, it is a lot of refactoring, re-implementing, and yeah, just a huge slog to have to go through everything again. So from here on out, I want to look at it more rigorously. Since I don't rigorously plan anymore to give myself some more flexibility and freedom, I don't know exactly what I'll do next, but I definitely want to work on spawning monsters and then having the server have a copy of the player's monsters. If you've seen the earlier videos, the original version of this map has like 20 slimes or so spawned throughout the map. What essentially you'll have is a set of monsters for every single player, and then for each set of monsters, you just set the visibility of those slimes so that only that player or only the people in that party can see those monsters. So I think this will have another huge refactor. I think that's a good thing because if you go to the other maps, I haven't done anything complicated with those monsters yet. There's no attacks and things like that. So I think it'd be good to solve that huge problem now rather than having to go and refactor 13 more maps in the future to match a more complex situation. And you can see there's like some bugginess here that I probably need to accommodate for of there being two copies of this player. There's a bit more nuance when it comes to switching back to a server, reloading a player's information, perhaps re-triggering some of the same logic. And that leads to this kind of weird bugginess that I won't get into the minutiae of now, but they're all things that I need to work on to polish this multiplayer experience. And since it's past the reset time now, you can see that our stock has restocked automatically. I did do some additional implementation beyond just migrating everything to multiplayer, such as restocking these shops and things like that. So yeah, that's where we're at. As for some background updates, a few months ago, I was talking about wanting to learn more about history and politics so that I could have some more context for how I want to structure the plot in the game. Because a lot of stories are taken from reality in some ways. And also, I just think it's vital information to understand the world and to be aware of what you're contributing to or not contributing to. And I won't dive into any of the particular topics that I've learned about because I'm not a professional. And I feel like with a lot of these things, you learn them through iterations and you get more perspectives of the story, even if it's like historical. You may have learned something in school from, I don't know, maybe just the American perspective, and maybe there's like huge gaps in what actually happened. And it's kind of ironic because as I have learned a lot about different current events, history, politics, and so on, it has de emphasized the urgency of working on this game in the sense that it's very obvious that there's a lot more pressing issues to work on. I'm definitely now at the point where I'm willing to put action into those things, even if it means not being able to spend 100% of my time just focused on the game. You know, things like volunteering and helping out in your community. It's obviously when you look at most governments, they're prescribing poverty for most people, so you can't just rely on your taxes going towards helping people out and you can just do your own thing. And also joining different discussion groups, so it's not like I'm just learning about these things isolated and it feels kind of helpless. One of the things that I've learned over the years from learning about different ways in which society is ill or corrupt is that it's mainly difficult to cope with that information when you are not doing anything about it other than just consuming this information at home or what have you. When you actually take some action within your own scope, it's much easier to pay attention and not turn a blind eye. So although I don't feel like I'm in a super secure situation with the game not being released yet, I do think that those kind of things don't really matter when the world is going to shit. I do think that those kind of things can take a little bit of a back seat, and there is room to make life a lot more robust by not only just focusing on myself and what I want to accomplish in the future. So I also think a lot of things become meaningless when they're untethered from helping other people or being a part of a community in some way. Like to give a quick example, I was thinking about joining one of the many running clubs or hiking groups that they have, observing what's happened with past hobbies and interests. Either it's like you have to set some arbitrary goal, like, okay, I'm going to run at this pace, or go and join a marathon or something like that. And then you have to continuously give yourself some kind of carrot to work towards. But instead of doing that, this time around, I looked at different volunteering things that I could do. And there's actually a lot of things where you can socialize with other people, you can get some exercise in, you can do some weightlifting through the real physical labor. And it's completely tethered to the actual impact it's having on other people's lives. I think those kind of things will feel much more fulfilling, much more purposeful, because they actually do serve some kind of purpose beyond just another notch in your personal achievements, but don't really affect anyone else in a good way. So yeah, that's where we're at. I'm definitely still excited about this game and it feels good to be in this position, but I feel even more enthusiastic about the community related changes that I'm making in my life right now. Because as I mentioned before in passing around January, I do think that every little action matters. I think when you first find out about an issue, there may be a temptation to think like, oh, if I can't solve this, then, what's the point? But in reality, there's tons of people. Very small interactions can restore people's faith or give them a bit more energy to continue surviving or fighting. So yeah, I don't think there's any excuse to not take the time to gradually learn about things and eventually try to be a part of the change. So that's all for today. I think today definitely feels a lot more somber, but I envision that there'll be a lot more exciting updates coming soon now that we're out of just doing pure data management. Thanks for taking the time to watch. Subscribe if you'd like to continue following these game development updates, and I'll be back in about 2 weeks with the next one.